Nobody came. The balloons he had carefully tied that morning sagged in the corners, like dreams too tired to stay afloat. At 73, Tom sat alone, staring at the birthday card he had bought for himself, the only one he would ever open that day. The silence of the room pressed against his chest, whispering the cruel truth. He had become invisible, forgotten, left behind. He wondered if this was how his story ended, lonely and unloved. But just as despair began to settle, a knock at the door shattered the silence, and with it, everything Tom thought he knew about his life. Tom Henderson wasn't always invisible. Once, he had been the kind of man people turned to in a crisis. For 43 years, he taught mathematics at Roosevelt High School in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Students who couldn't grasp algebra found clarity in his patient explanations. Parents trusted him with their teenagers' futures. Colleagues sought his advice during budget meetings and curriculum changes. His classroom, room 237, had been a sanctuary of order and encouragement. Equations filled the blackboard like poetry. Student achievement certificates lined the walls, and on his desk sat a small wooden sign that read, "Mistakes are proof you're trying." Tom believed in second chances, in the power of persistence, and in the quiet dignity that came from helping others succeed. But that was before retirement, before his wife Margaret passed away from cancer 3 years ago, before his adult children moved to distant cities, wrapped up in careers and families of their own, before his friends, one by one, stopped calling. Now Tom lived alone in a modest apartment on Maple Street, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and walls lined with photographs of a life that felt increasingly distant. Margaret smiling at their wedding, their son David graduating from college, their daughter Sarah holding her first baby, pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and dinner tables surrounded by laughter. But the apartment had grown quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that made the refrigerator's hum sound like a freight train, and every footstep echo like thunder. Tom had tried to stay connected. He'd joined the local senior center, volunteered at the library, even attended a few book clubs. But conversations felt forced, artificial. People were polite, yes, but distant. They had their own lives, their own problems, their own circles. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Tom had become an outsider looking in. His 73rd birthday fell on a Tuesday in March, the kind of day where spring teased at the edges of winter, but snow still clung to the shadows. Tom had been planning it for weeks, nothing elaborate, just a small gathering. He'd invited his old teaching colleague Frank, his neighbor Mrs. Patterson, and the Henderson family from down the street who always waved when he walked to the mailbox. Just cake and coffee, he'd said when he called them. Nothing fancy, just company. They'd all said yes. They'd promised to come. That morning, Tom woke before sunrise. He showered, shaved carefully around the gray stubble he could never quite eliminate, and put on his best cardigan, the navy blue one Margaret had bought him for their 45th anniversary. He walked to the corner bakery and bought a small chocolate cake, the kind with white buttercream frosting and room for exactly 73 candles. Back home, he arranged the living room. He moved the coffee table closer to the couch, set out his good china, the plates with the tiny roses around the edges. He hung a few balloons from the lamp, positioned the cake in the center of the table, and even put on some soft jazz, the kind Margaret used to hum while cooking dinner. By 2 p.m., everything was ready. Tom sat in his favorite chair, watching the clock, listening for footsteps in the hallway. 3 p.m. came and went. No knock at the door. At 3:30, Tom checked his phone. No messages. He called Frank's house. It went straight to voicemail. 4 p.m. The balloons had begun to sag slightly. Tom rearranged the napkins, checked the coffee pot, and peered out the window. The street was empty except for a few cars and the postal worker making his rounds. By 5 p.m., Tom's hope had curdled into something heavier. He sat alone with his cake, the candles unlit, and the terrible understanding that no one was coming. Not today. Maybe not ever. He didn't cry. Men his age, especially men from his generation, didn't cry over birthday parties. But something inside him cracked, quiet and final, like ice breaking on a distant pond. At 6 p.m., Tom finally lit the candles, all 73 of them. The tiny flames danced in the growing darkness, casting shadows on the walls lined with memories. He closed his eyes, made a silent wish, not for presents or surprises, but simply to matter to someone, somewhere, and began to blow them out. That's when someone knocked at his door. Tom froze mid-breath, candle smoke curling around his face. Hope flickered briefly in his chest, then died just as quickly. Probably someone selling something, or a delivery for the wrong apartment. But the knock came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. Tom stood slowly, his knees protesting, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he saw a young woman, maybe 30, holding a crying toddler and looking frazzled. Behind her stood a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, clutching a stuffed elephant and staring at the floor. Tom opened the door cautiously. "Yes?" The woman looked up, eyes red from exhaustion. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm Maria Santos. I just moved into 4B, and—" She paused, struggling with the squirming toddler. "My daughter locked us out. The super won't answer, and I don't know anyone else in the building. I saw your light and thought maybe you could help us call a locksmith." Tom looked at the little girl, who was staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. She pointed past him into the apartment. "Why do you have so many candles, mister?" Maria's face flushed. "Sophia, don't be rude." "It's all right," Tom said quietly. He glanced back at his living room, at the cake with its forest of melted candles, the empty chairs, the deflated balloons. "It's my birthday." Sophia's eyes went wide. "Where is everybody? Where's your party?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Tom felt his throat tighten. "Well," he said slowly, "sometimes parties are just smaller than expected." Maria's expression shifted. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the careful way he'd arranged everything, the birthday card propped against the lamp with his own handwriting visible. Understanding washed over her face like a wave. "Oh," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have." "Mama," Sophia interrupted, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "Can we sing Happy Birthday? Papa always says birthdays need singing." Maria looked uncertain, but something in Tom's expression, a mixture of surprise and desperate hope, made the decision for her. Would you like that?" Tom's voice came out smaller than he'd intended. Yes, that would be nice." What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply human. Maria stepped into the apartment, her toddler calming in her arms. Sophia ran to the cake, eyes sparkling at the candles. "Hair, this is the biggest birthday cake I ever saw," she announced. "You must be really, really old." Tom chuckled, the first genuine laugh he'd had in weeks. "Really, really old," he agreed. Maria set her son down on the couch, where he immediately became fascinated with the balloon strings. "I feel terrible that you're spending your birthday alone," she said softly. "We just moved here from El Salvador. I don't have family nearby either. I know how lonely it can feel." Tom relit the candles, his hands steadier now. "Where's your husband, Sophia's father?" Maria's face tightened slightly. "He's deployed. Army. Won't be back for 8 months. She paused. "Sophia asks about him every night. She misses having a man around to, teach her things, play with her." Something shifted in Tom's chest. He looked at Sophia, who was now examining his bookshelf with intense curiosity, running her small finger along the spines of his teaching manuals and Margaret's romance novels. "Do you like math?" he asked her. Sophia wrinkled her nose. "It's hard." "Everything's hard before it's easy," Tom said, the same words he'd spoken to thousands of students over the years. "Want to learn a magic trick with numbers?" For the next hour, Tom's apartment filled with something it hadn't held in years. Laughter. Sophia learned that if you multiply any number by 9 and add the digits together, you'll always get 9. Maria discovered that Tom had taught her nephew years ago, before the family moved away. The toddler, Miguel, found endless entertainment in the balloon strings and Tom's patient willingness to play peekaboo. When it came time to blow out the candles, Tom looked around the room. It wasn't the party he'd planned, but it was perfect. Sophia helped him blow out each candle, counting in both English and Spanish. Maria hummed "Happy Birthday" in a voice that reminded Tom of Margaret's morning songs. "Make a wish," Sophia demanded. Tom closed his eyes, but for the first time in years, he didn't wish for the past to return. He wished for more moments like this one. As the evening wound down, Maria gathered her children. "Thank you," she said, but the words felt inadequate. "You saved our day. And I think maybe we saved yours too?" Tom smiled. "You did more than that." As she reached the door, Sophia turned back. "Mr. Tom, will you teach me more number magic tomorrow?" If your mama says it's okay, Tom replied, looking at Maria. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. It's very okay. After they left, Tom sat in his living room surrounded by cake crumbs, deflated balloons, and the lingering scent of a child's laughter. His apartment felt different. Not full, exactly, but no longer empty. He picked up his phone and for the first time in months he made a call. "David?" he said when his son answered. "It's Dad. I know you're busy, but I wanted to tell you about my birthday. It was unexpected." The next morning brought changes Tom couldn't have anticipated. Maria knocked at his door around 9 a.m., holding a thermos of coffee and wearing a shy smile. "Sophia insisted," she said. "She wants to learn the 9 trick you showed her." Tom invited them in, and within minutes, his coffee table had become a classroom. Sophia practiced multiplication, while Miguel built towers with Tom's old teaching blocks, salvaged from his classroom years ago. Maria shared stories of her husband Carlos, a staff sergeant stationed in Germany, and how she'd been struggling to help Sophia with homework while working double shifts at the hospital. "I could help," Tom offered quietly. "With the math, I mean, if you'd like." Maria's eyes filled with gratitude. "Are you sure? I can't pay much." "I wouldn't want payment," Tom said. "I'd want the company." And so began an arrangement that neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Every afternoon at 4 p.m., Maria would knock on Tom's door. Sophia would burst in with her backpack and endless questions. Miguel would toddle straight to the toy box Tom had hastily assembled from Margaret's old knitting supplies and a few donated items from neighbors. Tom's apartment transformed. Children's drawings appeared on his refrigerator, Spanish words mixed with English around his coffee table. The silence that had once felt suffocating was replaced by the sounds of learning, playing, and growing. But the real magic happened gradually, in small moments. When Sophia struggled with fractions, Tom didn't just explain the math. He taught her to see numbers as pieces of a puzzle, each one important, each one belonging. When Miguel knocked over a tower of blocks, Tom showed him how to build it stronger the second time. And when Maria worked late shifts at the hospital, Tom would babysit without being asked, reading stories in his careful teacher's voice and making sure Sophia finished her homework before her favorite cartoon came on. 3 weeks after that forgotten birthday, Tom's phone rang during dinner. It was his daughter, Sarah. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson called me. She said you've been helping a young family in your building? That you're tutoring again?" Tom glanced across his living room, where Sophia was teaching Miguel to count in Spanish, her voice patient and encouraging. "Something like that," he said. "She said you seem happier, different." Tom considered this. "I suppose I am." "Dad," Sarah's voice cracked slightly, "I'm sorry I missed your birthday. Work got crazy, and I thought you wouldn't mind celebrating late." "It's all right, sweetheart," Tom said, and meant it. "I had company after all." But the story didn't end there. It spread, quietly at first, then with growing momentum. Mrs. Patterson, Tom's elderly neighbor, had been watching the daily routine from her window. She saw Maria's children running to Tom's door each afternoon, heard the laughter echoing through the thin walls, noticed how Tom smiled when he checked his mailbox now. She mentioned it to her daughter during their weekly phone call. Her daughter, a social worker, mentioned it to her supervisor. The supervisor, intrigued by stories of intergenerational connection, mentioned it to a reporter friend at the Cedar Falls Gazette. The reporter, Jenny Walsh, arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a simple request. Could she write about the friendship that had blossomed between Tom and the Santos family? Tom was hesitant. He'd never sought attention. But Maria, ever practical, saw an opportunity. "There are probably other lonely teachers out there," she said. "Other families who need help with homework. Maybe your story could help them find each other." The article appeared in the Sunday edition under the headline, "Retired Teacher Finds New Purpose Tutoring Neighbors' Children." It included a photo of Tom sitting at his kitchen table with Sophia, both of them bent over a math worksheet, Sophia's tongue poking out in concentration. The response was immediate. The newspaper received dozens of letters. Parents called asking if Tom might tutor their children. Other retirees inquired about volunteer opportunities. The local community center reached out about starting a formal intergenerational program. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. On Monday morning, Tom found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a handwritten note on military letterhead. Mr. Henderson, my wife Maria told me about your kindness to our family. I am deployed overseas and unable to thank you in person, but I wanted you to know that your generosity means everything to a soldier who worries about his children every day. Sophia talks about her math teacher in every letter. You have given my family something I cannot provide from thousands of miles away: stability, learning, and joy. When I return, I would be honored to shake your hand. With deepest gratitude, Staff Sergeant Carlos Santos. Tom read the letter 3 times, his eyes misty. He folded it carefully and placed it on his refrigerator, right next to Sophia's latest drawing, a stick figure family that included a tall man with gray hair labeled Mr. Tom. 6 months later, Tom stood in the crowded community center auditorium, nervously adjusting his tie. The Bridge Generations program he'd inadvertently inspired had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 20 retired teachers were now paired with families needing educational support. The waiting list had grown to over 50 families. Tonight was the program's official launch, and somehow Tom had been asked to speak. He looked out at the audience. Maria sat in the front row with Sophia and Miguel. Behind them, dozens of families, teachers, and community members filled every seat. At the back, he spotted Jenny Walsh, the reporter whose story had started it all, her camera ready. Tom stepped to the microphone. His voice was quiet at first, but it carried. 6 months ago, I spent my birthday alone, he began. I thought that meant I didn't matter anymore. I thought being forgotten was the same as being worthless. He paused, finding Sophia's eyes in the crowd. She gave him a tiny wave. Then a young mother knocked on my door, not because she knew me, but because she needed help. And in helping her, I remembered something I'd forgotten. We all have something to give. Age doesn't diminish that. Loneliness doesn't erase it. Sometimes we just need someone to knock on our door and remind us. The applause was warm, sustained. But what moved Tom most wasn't the clapping. It was seeing Maria wipe away tears, watching Sophia beam with pride, and noticing that in the back of the room, other elderly faces were nodding with recognition. After the ceremony, as people mingled over coffee and cake, a younger man approached Tom. He was maybe 40, wearing a military uniform, his arm in a sling. Staff Sergeant Carlos Santos, he introduced himself, extending his good hand. I just got back from deployment yesterday. Tom's eyes widened. Carlos, Maria's told me so much about you. She's told me about you too, Carlos said, his voice thick with emotion. You've been a father to my children when I couldn't be. There's no way to repay that. Tom shook his head. You don't repay kindness. You pass it forward. Carlos smiled. Sophia wants to show you something. He gestured toward his daughter, who was approaching with a carefully wrapped package. It's for your unbirthday, Sophia announced proudly. The one we missed. Inside the package was a framed photo. Tom sitting at his kitchen table with both children, all 3 of them laughing at something Miguel had done with his blocks. Below the photo, in Sophia's careful first-grade handwriting, were the words, "Best teacher ever." Tom felt his composure finally break. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. As the evening ended and families began to leave, Tom found himself standing with Maria by the community center's bulletin board. It was covered with photos, teachers and students, elderly volunteers, and young families, moments of connection that had sprouted from his forgotten birthday. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door? Maria asked. Tom considered this. I think you would have found another way to help your children, and I think I would have found another way to matter. Maybe it just would have taken longer. Maria smiled. Maybe, but I'm glad we found each other when we did. Tom nodded, looking at the photos on the wall. Each one told a story of loneliness transformed into connection, of isolation becoming community, and all of it had started with a knock on a door and the courage to let a stranger in. The forgotten birthday had become unforgettable, not because of who remembered it, but because of what grew from it. In a world that often overlooks its elders and isolates its families, Tom and Maria had created something beautiful. Proof that we need each other more than we admit, and that the best gifts aren't wrapped in paper, they're wrapped in presence. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest gestures. a knock on a door, an offer to help, a willingness to see past our own loneliness and notice someone else's need. Tom Henderson's story reminds us that being forgotten doesn't mean being finished, that our value isn't measured by who remembers our birthday, but by how we choose to show up for others. And that sometimes, when we stop waiting for our lives to matter and start making other lives matter, we discover we were never really forgotten at all. In our fast-paced world, how many Tom Hendersons live quietly around us? How many Maria Santos families struggle alone, needing just a little support? This story challenges us to look beyond our own doors, to notice the neighbors we've overlooked, and to remember that community isn't built by grand gestures. It's built by daily choices to care. Have you ever been the person knocking on someone's door for help? Have you ever been the one sitting alone, wondering if you still matter? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the power of human connection. Because some of the most beautiful friendships begin with the courage to ask for help and the wisdom to offer it.